And that's part of what human beings bring to the table sometimes. But that's where they are at. And so when you get them angry, at least they're involved in the conversation. Yeah? You know, if they don't care, then there's no conversation. But if they're angry, there's a conversation. And so I think it's a good thing. Yes?
What about the movie? Would you publish it?
We don't know yet. There's a lot of things up in the air with regard to the movie right now. Even as I'm here in Kiev, there's a conversation happening. You know, if they're interested at 100,000, you can imagine what their interest is at 13 to 15 million, right? And so it's pretty. It's a pretty elevated conversation right now. We don't know. And part of the question is, will I be able to keep control over it or not? And I may not be able to because of some of the other guys that were involved from the beginning. So, don't know. But we'll work that out a step at a time. It's always fun to think about, you know, who could play God and who could. I laugh, I say, maybe Oprah because she already knows how.
In the Dogma movie, there's a black woman who is a god. You seen that? The Dogma movie.
Oh, yeah. Or, you know, if you remember Matrix? Yeah. We used the kind of, unfortunately, she passed away. But I love the scene where she's at the kitchen, she turns and she says, not exactly who you were expecting, right? You know, that's a great line. So, but yeah, I mean, we'll see. No rush. Just don't want a bad job. Yes.
Mr. Paul, could you please tell more about your relation with your children? Did you have opportunity to talk to them about life, about relationships?
Yes.
And what were their responses and what age?
Yes. My relationship with my children is excellent. I mean, it's nothing compared with my relationship with my own parents. I'm a little bit closer to my mother, but my father and they're both still alive. My father and I still have a long ways to go. But my relationship with my children, this book was not a big surprise to them because, in fact, one of the responses was, what's everybody so excited about, you know? Because they've already been inside all these kinds of conversations. My life is an open book to them. There is nothing that my children or my wife do not know about me. I have no secrets, none. But it took a very difficult process in order for that to be true. And because my life was full of secrets most of my life. And so my children, and in terms of my own process, depended on how old they were, that I then brought them into that conversation. You know, my oldest ones were right in the middle of all the pain and damage and hurt that I caused. Yeah, because see, the facade has to come down, but for some of us, we have to be caught before it comes down. I got caught. Yeah.
There is such American idiom to get somebody's goat.
Yeah.
Such impression that there is facade, and behind this facade there is a goat. And if you nag somebody, you get this goat. Why didn't you use this idiom? And instead of goat, you use shark?
Well, because that idiom actually would not work. To get someone's goat is not to get to the truth. It's to get at something that irritates them, right? So it's a different idiom. As an American idiom, to get someone's goat means that you, with intention, got to something that they were trying to hide, in a sense, you know. And the shack is more like, that is the soul of the human heart, you know. That is what I'm trying to hide, and it's not my goat, right? It's actually my soul. And so the idiom does not work well in terms of using it as a metaphor that way. The house on the inside worked better for me because we have all these rooms, we lock the doors. I mean, there's just a lot of things that you can play off of that. And but to get someone's goal, it's basically to make them mad about something. You get past their defenses and make them mad. It's to get to something that is valuable to them. Yeah. Yes.
I read that your wife insisted that the book was named Shack. Is it true?
No.
No?
That was my idea. And I liked it. There were some people that thought, that's not a good title. I liked it. I said, no, we're keeping the title. I like it. And it's been a little difficult to translate in some languages, you know, and there was like a 6-month discussion talking about the Ukrainian version about which sort of shack to make this, and they worked it out. So, you know, I don't even know how to pronounce it, but it's whatever the title is on the book. But yeah, no, that was my idea from the beginning. Yeah, got a question back here.
Yeah, it does sound phonosemantically correspondently to English. If you hear like Hижа, shack, it has all this African you know.
Yeah, yeah.
My question is, how long have you been conceiving this idea and like putting the plot things all together, and how long did it take you to produce that body of work? And another question is alongside, did you have to come back to some images and erase it and redo, you know what I mean, like all this first, like
Yeah.
Did it go smoothly, or you had to come back and redo things?
Yeah, that's a good. Those are both really, both good questions. People ask me, how long did it take you to write the book? I tell them 50 years, right? Because I had to live it. I could not have written this book 20 years ago or 10 years ago. And I really had to come to a place where I felt healthy enough as a human being to write something. And I was 50 years old in 2005 when I first wrote this story for my kids. I had never thought the plot up before. It had never been part of my history. What happened was, Kim said, would you write something? She didn't even think book. I've never written anything of that size. So I started with conversations, basically questions I wasn't allowed to ask when I was growing up in a religious environment, right? And there's lots of those. So I would have those conversations, and those conversations became living. And I was working downtown Portland, and I would, I'm a Canadian, I'm born Canadian, and I'm still Canadian. And but I'm living in the Northwest, in Oregon, because that's where Kim lives, so I live wherever she lives. And so, yeah, you know about that. So I would ride the train 40 minutes each way, right? And I would have yellow legal pads. I'm just writing conversations. Well, I didn't want to lose them because I had stacks of these things. So I start putting them into the computer, and I'm thinking, if I made this a story, who is asking these questions? Why? And that's where Mackenzie was born. So the whole plot line did not happen until the beginning of 2005. And when I look at my own life, and those 11 years went from January 4th, 1994 to the end of 2004. 11 years. 2005, I finally feel like I'm healthy enough to write something for my kids. You know, that kind of puts in one place. And that's where everything happened. And I'm working 3 jobs at the same time. And I'm fitting in writing in between. And it was like a river. It was like it had waited for 50 years, right? I had one day, for example, a Saturday, where I had no work, and Kim and the kids were gone somewhere. And in 8.5 hours, I started in the morning, in 8.5 hours I wrote 4 complete chapters, which, just like a river, right? And the 4th of those chapters is chapter 15, which is called Festival of Friends. And chapter 15 is in the book the way I wrote it, the day I wrote it. It's no changes. It has never been touched in a rewrite. And I've rewritten a lot of it just because, you know, once you start thinking about how to communicate things, there were certain things I didn't like, but the concepts stayed. The characters stayed, the scenes stayed. It's just that I worked on the writing craft itself. And chapter 15 became sort of the benchmark, and I worked on the other sections so that they would rise up to meet chapter 15. And so 6 months and the first manuscript was done. And then working and getting it ready for publication took it took about a year before I felt like, okay, we can print this, right, for public consumption. And I made a number of changes in that time, but none of them substantial concept-wise or anything like that. That just was part of the whole process. Mission Impossible? No? No?
One more question, and if you don't mind, did you use the postmodernism tricks in your book, like Chuck Palahniuk uses for James Curcio, like prestige, time bending? Well, because you mentioned postmodernism.
Yeah. I very subtly, and I used more quantum theory than I did those kinds of tricks. There is what I did was I pushed the story back into uncertainty because I didn't want a nice, neat religious package, right? Life's not like that. Life has got more mystery to it, more wonder to it, more uncertainty to it. And so even though there's very concrete things throughout the story, I push it back in, I push the storyline back into what really happened here. You know, did this or did this? And you can't tell for sure. There's no answer to that. And so, yeah, there's a little bit of that, but it wasn't the postmodern trick. It was trying to push it out of the realm of just absolute uncertainty, because I don't think life is like that.
But maybe in such a way your style of literature could be called as magic realism, not postmodernism.
Yeah, I don't call it postmodernism at all. And that was one of the problems, because when 26 publishers turned it down. Well, the faith-based publishers turned it down for two reasons. They didn't know where to put it. It didn't fit anywhere, in no genre, right? And the second thing was they thought it was too edgy, too difficult. The secular publishers turned it down for two reasons. First reason, they didn't know where to put it, right? They didn't have a genre that it fit. Even now, you go into a store, you might find it in the self-help section, you might find it in fantasy, you might find it in mystery, you might find it in theology. You just don't know. The second reason that the secular publishers turned it down was it had too much Jesus. So, edgy versus Jesus, and I got stuck in the middle there. And it's just that one of the publishers told me, and you'll find this fascinating, they said to me later, it was one of the 26 publishers who came back to talk after the book, and she says there is an unspoken rule in publishing that goes like this: if somebody else is doing it, we can't do it. But if nobody else is doing it, we can't do it. And what she means by that was that in publishing, if they find something that sort of works, they suddenly stick to that, and they think that that's what the demographics are all about. And so you get a whole bunch of books that look alike, sound alike, have the same message with a different cover. And they don't think that anybody else thinks outside of those parameters, because that's all they know. If nobody else is doing it, we can't do it, right? And so it happens in music. It happens when a creative art becomes an industry. Now they put it into a box and they try to package it a certain way. Well, art just doesn't work like that, and so that had a huge effect. We've got a couple more questions up here.